when I first read this verse, my mind immediately went back to a trip that we had taken a few years back to Sri Kanchipuram. And I believe Rasanath had mentioned this in his own class a few days ago. And during that trip, we went to see this incredibly beautiful form of Vamana Dev. And so the temple there is called Ulaga Alanga Perumal. And it's unlike any temple I've ever been to. So you go inside and everything is stone inside and it's dark. It's very much like a South Indian temple. And then when you walk in, when you get to the form of the Murti, I was so struck because you can't really see the Lord. You have to almost like crawl a little bit and like look up to see how the Lord's foot is actually raised. And it's almost as though Vamana Dev is captured in action as he is placing one foot on one of the paces of land that Bali Maharaj has promised to him. And that was the image that kind of came to me in my mind when I read this verse. And when I was trying to put myself in Bali Maharaj's in his position of being able to see the sole of the Lord's foot, the first word that came to mind for me was the word insignificant. And so if the devotees will allow me, I'd like for each of us to take moments and to close your eyes. And I'd like you to just meditate or to just allow yourself and just see what comes up for you when you think of yourself as being insignificant. Okay. And so would anybody like to share what their experience was? I know it was a short amount of time, but still, and it's an experience. There's no right or wrong answer for this. Whatever it is that you felt.
Haribol, Rinda.
Haribol, Jamuna Jaya.
Hi. Thank you for that. That was really, really cool. I felt the first word that came to my mind, that I envisioned in my mind, is this is the truth. This is the truth. I am insignificant. Wow. And then I felt a little bit of shame that I know I'm insignificant, but yet I sure don't act like I am most of the time. I act like I'm pretty darn significant. So it was at once like, it was like holding the mirror up. It's like, okay, this is the truth, kiddo. You are insignificant. And then there's like, whoa, but I don't act like that. And then there was a sort of feeling like, okay, course adjustment, like acknowledge that. So.
Wow. So beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. I just, that's so inspiring, actually. I know that there came the bout of, wow, I don't act like this. But the fact that for you, the words that came to mind was, this is the truth. That's so powerful. So powerful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Hi, Krishna. Good morning.
Haribol, dear Brajrani.
So, I mean, as you said the words, what I kind of felt my sense of self doing was going from this sense of self to, I felt myself literally reducing until like the size of like this grain of sand. And it was like, what does that mean? I mean, like there's not even at that size, that there's not even thought. That's not even the relationship to the world is, I mean, they kick the world. I mean, the Jivajay's word of insignificant is like, it's like I didn't know what to think right? At that size.
Wow. Wow. Yes. So again, so powerful. How often do we give ourselves these opportunities, even if it's just for moments, to actually experience what it must be like? And I so much relate to what you were saying. Like, what does that mean if I'm so small? And that image of the grain of rice, very, very, very powerful. We'll take one more person if that's okay.
Hi, Krishna. This is Gail.
Hi, Gail.
Hi, Bo. Yes, I immediately thought of, how there's Raggedy Andy and Raggedy Ann. Well, I thought
Yes.
of I thought of Raggedy Ann, because I just when I think of the word insignificant in relationship to us, I think of powerlessness, just like a baby in the womb. Can't do anything at all for him or herself. And it's only when the lifeless doll is picked up by its owner that it comes to life. Just like, if a child has a doll as a plaything, it's just like a rag, unless it's cared for by the child. So I feel like that's our position, that we're just lifeless, meaningless dolls until Krishna picks us up and cuddles us and plays with us and like that. That's it.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Wow. What an analogy of, a lifeless doll, and that we are actually nothing without Krishna being able to empower us. Just really so profound. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you who shared. I'll be honest, I'm feeling a sense of so much happiness and pride that I am in the company of such exalted souls and individuals. And I'll say why, because when I tried to do this for myself, my false ego hated it. It did not go to any to sense of, wow, I experienced shame. I wish I could actually tap into this. No, my false ego just really rejected it. It didn't know what to do. And in fact, instead, it came up with all of these identifications, almost as kind of offering proof or evidence that, no, you're important. You're a mother, you're like a meditation teacher, you're a disciple of this personality, you're friends with such and such persons. And so it tried to really establish its own significance. And it revealed to me how deep the attachments to the different identities I have, and what the false ego will do, even if it's just a few minutes of trying to tap into the truth, as you mentioned. I love that you use that word, Jamuna Jaya Prabhu, the truth that I am actually insignificant. I'm a small part and parcel of Krishna. That is what makes me significant, but I try to experience my significance in a way that's apart from that. And materially, actually, I am insignificant. Spiritually, I'm significant, but materially, I'm insignificant. And so today, what I'd like to do is to just focus on this piece around how Krishna really breaks the false ego of so many of the personalities that we find in the Bhagavatam. And we'll begin with Bali Maharaj, that's where we are within the Bhagavatam. And how Krishna arranges for certain circumstances to occur in the lives of these personalities, and to see what their response is when Krishna actually arranges for these circumstances. And we'll see within some of the examples that we'll speak about today, how each devotee could have walked away or could have prevented the dismantling or the crumbling of their false ego, of the very particular identities that Krishna is actually trying to break. But instead, what they do is they lean in. And that is really what surrender is. It's as I continue to read the Bhagavatam, as I try to understand it in different ways, my own definition of surrender is starting to change. It's not just giving everything up. It's actually giving the thing that we hold most dear to us. And that is, personally for me, my false ego. That is what is most dear to me. It's the identities that I have within this material world that I also see I will do anything to maintain. And so with that, let's go into the pastime of Bali Maharaj. And we'll also explore perhaps how there's this tension almost of how when the dismantling of the false ego, the opportunity occurs, along with it comes this sense of unfairness. And Krishna really brings this in such unique ways that are so specific to his devotees. And so with Bali Maharaj, if we go back in this pastime, we hear how Bali Maharaj promises Vamana Dev, when Vamana Dev asks for these 3 paces of land. And what I found as I went back to reread those verses so endearing as well as kind of humorous is that Bali Maharaj actually chastises Vamana Dev. If you remember, he says, "Why are you asking for something so little? Like I have the 3 worlds at my disposal. Like ask for something better." And Vamana Dev says, "No, I'm good with this. Are you, can you offer this to me?" And he says, "Yes, I will." And right after he makes this promise, and the Bhagavatam says he's just about to pour water into his hand to kind of to formalize this promise, Shukracharya steps in. And this is the first place I'd like to kind of stop and speak about how the false ego can look for outs. What I mean by that is how it can try to find ways to protect itself, right? Instead of giving up or allowing certain identities to be dismantled when Krishna deems it to be necessary for our spiritual advancement and progress. And so in this case, Shukracharya, Krishna empowers Shukracharya to be one of those outs for Bali Maharaj. And Shukracharya intervenes and he says, "Don't do it." And then what's amazing is that he almost acts as a lawyer and he says, "Look, there's the Shastric evidence to back up the fact that sometimes in certain cases you can lie. And so I know that in your heart, you're probably wondering, how can I get out of this? I just promised, but don't worry, I have proof for you." And in fact, Bali Maharaj could have taken shelter of those instructions, and we might have been hearing a very different pastime if he had, he actually followed the instructions of his spiritual master. But the glory of Bali Maharaj is that he doesn't do that. Now, Bali Maharaj has you can say, he has an attachment to a particular identity. And in this case, it is to fulfill his promises. And in fact, Shukracharya speaks to that very specifically. And he says, you won't be able to do that if you actually follow through on your promise to Vamana Dev, because Vamana Dev is coming in disguise. He's actually Vishnu. He's your enemy. And he's going to take away your ability to even make good on your promise. And yet Bali Maharaj says, it doesn't matter. I gave my word. I am going to follow through on this. And he finds himself in the position where that identity of being able to follow through on his promise to offer those 3 paces of land gets called into question. And what happens is that he gets tied up. That's what, and he's made to, in some ways, look like a fool. And yet, what does he do? He takes it all with a humble heart. And because of that surrender, because Bali Maharaj doesn't prevent Krishna from actually being, or Vishnu, Vamana Dev, from dismantling his ego, from dismantling this identity of being the ruler of the 3 worlds, of being a great personality who will always offer in charity to the brahmanas, he pleases the Lord so much that he actually endears himself to the Lord so much that the Lord becomes his own personal doorman. So that's the first way in which we can see that. And something that I would request the devotees to perhaps think about: where in your life have there been opportunities where you didn't want to, where you had an out, where perhaps even a senior person in your life, a mentor, has said, you know what, you don't have to do this. It's okay. I realize it's too hard for you. And have you been tempted, or have you followed through on your word? Even if that's at the risk of a particular identity of yours being called into question. So that's the first question prompt for a reflection that I'll leave you with. That, are there times in your life where this kind of situation has occurred, and what have you done? Because this is where the Bhagavatam actually really comes to life for us as aspiring devotees, that we can take strength in the fact that in difficult situations, others have been able to do so. And we can pray to them for that strength to show up similarly. So that's with Bali Maharaj. Now we'll move to Prithu Maharaj. And Prithu Maharaj's circumstance is so fascinating. So just very quickly, in order to glorify Prithu Maharaj, and also perhaps to help us put ourselves in his situation, let's go back and let's remind ourselves what happened with him. So Prithu Maharaj is about to perform his 100th Ashwamedha sacrifice, horse sacrifice, right? And as this is about to take place, Indra is starting to get envious. He's starting to feel really trapped in some ways. And he's recognizing that, oh my God, Prithu Maharaj is going to receive so much glory. In fact, he might become more powerful than me. And so what does Indra do, right? He makes himself invisible. He comes to steal the horse. And as if that's not enough, when he's leaving with the horse, instead of staying invisible, he actually dresses himself as a renunciant, as a sannyasi, and he takes the horse away. And so one of the sages, Atri Muni, sees this happening, and he tells Prithu Maharaj of what's happening. And so Prithu Maharaj goes after Indra, and when he does, he sees him in the garb of the sannyasi, and he's unable to do anything because he has tremendous respect for those in that ashram, in that garb. And when he comes back, having done nothing to Indra, Atri Muni once again comes back to him and he says, don't you see, Indra is actually perpetuating irreligion by doing this. You must go after him. You must kill him. And Prithu Maharaj goes after him once again. Indra recognizes the precarious situation he's in. And so he abandons his false dress and he leaves the horse. And so Prithu Maharaj resumes the sacrifice, and this happens again and again and again and again and again, until finally Prithu Maharaj just has enough. And just seeing the effects of what Indra is doing, he decides finally, Indra must be punished. The only way to do so is to kill him. And so he's about to, when his priests actually say, you know what, you shouldn't do this. We'll do this through the power of our own mantras. And as they're about to start, Brahma comes and tells them all that abandon this plan. I recognize the really the mischief and the challenges that Indra has now created by perpetuating these types of irreligious garb and mindsets. But he's an assistant to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And so imagine yourself in Prithu Maharaj's position. Brahma is coming to him And he's saying to Prithu Maharaj, if you pursue your desire to continue with this sacrifice, Indra will continue to misuse his power and introduce even more, if that's possible, many more irreligious systems. And so he says, you be the better person. Now, Indra can't control himself. You're wiser, you're more mature, and for the sake of the world, you be satisfied, even though you're fully capable of finishing the 100th horse sacrifice. Give it up. You're on the cusp of doing this incredibly monumental, achieving this incredibly monumental achievement, and a wise elder comes to you and says, I know, I realize that, this other person, this other devotee is interfering, but you know what? They can't help themselves. You're more wise. So I'm asking you to be the better person. Every time I read this pastime, I feel so much of a sense of unfairness on behalf of Prithu Maharaj, because Brahma is saying that, you have to take the high road. You take the high road, and this identity of being able to do something that very few people are able to achieve, complete the Ashwamedha sacrifices, you'll have to give that up. And here we see what Prithu Maharaj does. And even before that, one really, really important piece, Brahma says, and by the way, don't be angry with Indra. As to rub more salt into the wound. First, give it up. And then second of all, don't be angry with the person who prevented you from achieving this. And the amazing thing that we see, and we saw this with Bali Maharaj, we're seeing this with Prithu Maharaj, we'll see this with a few of the other personalities we'll talk about, is that there is an ability for each of these personalities, of each of these devotees, to see beyond their circumstance as it appears to them in that moment. They can see further, and they're able to actually tap into the fact that Krishna, Vishnu, has a plan. And that plan may not be what my plan is. And instead of staying and steeping in the feelings of unfairness, which is really coming from the false ego, because if we look at fairness and unfairness, it's based within the material realm. It isn't based in the spiritual realm at all. It's all based upon identity, position, power, everything related to the material body. It has nothing to do with the soul. And we see how both now, Bali Maharaj and Prithu Maharaj, are able to actually see beyond their present circumstances and are able to, instead of making an appeal and saying, this isn't fair, Indra's the king of heaven. For God's sake, he should be able to control himself. He doesn't do that. Instead, he says, okay. And what happens shortly afterwards is that Vishnu comes. And Vishnu comes with Indra. And he's kind of there almost. And he introduces Indra to say, and Indra's come to apologize. And I'm coming with Indra. And so I'm hoping that me coming with Indra will actually soften your heart. It's incredible. It's just truly incredible. And so Prithu Maharaj, and this is the beautiful thing that the Bhagavatam speaks about, with affection in his heart, forgives Indra. He himself lets go of any envy he has towards Indra, and with affection, he embraces Indra. Okay, so we could say, and at least my material mind, my material ego, this tends to happen to me, this tends to happen with me when it comes to the Bhagavatam. Well, we're talking about a great Mahajan, Bali Maharaj, who's the epitome of surrender, Atma Nivedana. And then we're talking about a Shakti Avesh avatar in terms of Prithu Maharaj. Come on, this is like too high. This is way too high. I mean, that's really nice and all, but maybe, a million lifetimes from now, I can aspire towards that. This isn't so relevant. My heart isn't able to really accept and follow in these footsteps. And so for those, perhaps, if there are any of you who are like me, the last two examples I'll give perhaps might be a little bit more relatable. And so we'll move to Vidura. Now, Vidura, as you all know, is the half brother, I guess you can call, of Dhritarashtra and Pandu, right? And after the Pandavas are exiled to the forest for 13 years, and they come back and they say, please give us our rightful half of the kingdom, there is the court all comes together, and Dhritarashtra is there, Duryodhana is there, and Dhritarashtra, it's on Dhritarashtra's request. Vidura doesn't even come on his own. It's on Dhritarashtra's request that he comes to this council. And there he's asked, what is his opinion? And so Duryodhana and his band of followers are all saying, we'll never give the other half of the kingdom back to the Pandavas, even though they fulfilled on their promise. And Vidura won't stand for it. He is extremely straightforward, and he is extremely truthful. And he says, you must give them back their kingdom. And he speaks to Dhritarashtra and he says, by keeping Duryodhana here, you're essentially harboring one of the most envious people. And this will not end up in any auspiciousness. And Duryodhana, hearing this, he gets so agitated and he speaks such cruel, insulting words to Vidura, calling him a spy, and just at the end of his insults tells him, tells the guards, toss the spy out of the palace. And before any of that can even occur, Vidura, with a very pained heart, leaves himself. And so when we look at the situation of Vidura, he's in this position where he loves his brother, Dhritarashtra. He's tried to be there for him as counsel, to try to make him see the path of Dharma, to see the truth. And now that position where he's just been trying to serve in whatever way possible has been taken away from him. And one of the most beautiful things right after this occurs in the Bhagavatam that is said about Vidura is that when he leaves the kingdom, and I'll quote this, it's specifically from Canto 3, Chapter 1, verse 16. It says, he was not sorry, for he considered the acts of the external energy to be supreme. And that is powerful, because we see this juxtaposition of his heart is heavy, it's pained, and simultaneously he's happy. And what is so beautiful about this is that, and this is what makes this section, especially with Vidura, so relatable for me, is that the feelings of whatever we are experiencing in a particular situation, whether it's hurt, whether it's disappointment, whether it's fear, it's allowed. That the devotee is very emotionally honest. And yet, at the same time, there is this higher truth, this higher intelligence that is guiding the devotee. And in this case, Prabhupada starts off that purport by actually saying, a pure devotee of the Lord is never perturbed by any awkward position that is created by the external energy of the Lord. And so we see how with Vidura, we're getting even more of a roadmap as to how, as devotees, we can interact in the world. It doesn't mean that we subdue or shove away our emotions. Rather, we have the light of the Bhagavatam. We have the gift of mentors and senior devotees and very honest and genuine practitioners of Bhakti to help us in guiding us in understanding what that truth is. And the truth is that even though, and this is the verse from the Gita that Prabhupada actually brings up in this connection, 327, Prakrite Kriyamanani Gunai Karmani Sarvesha, that the spirit soul is bewildered by the influence of the false ego. And because of that, thinks that everything that he does is that he is the doer of all activities, when in actuality, it's all being carried out by the three modes of material nature. And so we can see from Madhura what it actually means to be able to walk this line of being able to feel whatever and experience whatever we experience, and yet be guided by the truth, being guided by the soul, as opposed to being influenced by the false ego. And then finally, the last personality we'll speak about, and probably the one that I personally relate to the most, is Gajendra. And so we hear of how Gajendra goes into this beautiful lake to sport with his wives, with his family members, and he's cooling off in this beautiful lake. He doesn't have a care in the world when this crocodile comes and just clamps its teeth on one of his legs. And when that takes place, what's amazing about Gajendra, and what in terms of relatability, is that for 1,000 years, and that sounds about right to me for the way that my false ego also manifests in these situations, he relies on his own strength, his own intelligence, and his own capacity. Because there's so much, and that as an elephant, as one of the most strongest animals within the jungle, within the forest, he is conditioned. His false ego is saying that you can do this, and that's what our false ego does. It will constantly say, you can do it. There's always a way in which you can preserve your identity. You don't need to give it up. It's always finding ways to protect itself. But finally, after 1,000 years, as his strength is waning, he remembers Krishna. He remembers Vishnu. And the evolution of his prayers is actually so beautiful to note, that at the beginning, he's glorifying Vishnu. And then he goes to say that even a dumb animal like me, Vishnu, you are so magnanimous, you'll save me. And he continues his glorification until, and this is where the evolution of his prayers really hits this climax of, he says, actually, once you save me, I don't want to stay in this body anymore. I realize this is useless. I am being covered by the trappings of the false ego. I want to be liberated from all of this. And this is really what, to me, these 4 personalities of the Bhagavatam are offering to us. They're offering how, in different situations, each of these devotees had opportunities to turn towards their false ego as their protector, as their savior, and so that they could really avoid the experience of feeling insignificant. And yet, every single time, they chose otherwise. And instead of falling into the trappings of the false ego, they leaned in and they allowed themselves to feel insignificant. And by doing so, they actually experienced this great relief, this freedom, that in moments, at least for myself, I'm only able to access it very fleetingly in small moments. The word insignificant in the material sense brings forth almost a an experience of I'm worthless, I'm nothing, this very, this mindset of I'm, I have low self-esteem. And yet the funny thing is, in the spiritual sense, there is no greater place of strength to come from than to actually rely on our own insignificance, because then we become free from the false ego. And instead, we can actually depend on Krishna, who is most significant, and truly, truly be able to please him, which is what every single one of these personalities, these 4 devotees, were able to do. And so with that, I'll end there. If there is time, Gorsha and Prabhu, if anybody has any questions or reflections, actually, even more so, reflections, anything, would be so happy to hear.
Thank you very much. It was so thoughtful and also inspiring, especially this topic of breaking through the false ego with these amazing examples of Gajendra, Vidura, Prathamaraj, and Balimaraj. Extremely grateful. Since there's very less time, I wouldn't take... everybody is unmuted. You should be able to unmute yourself, and if you have a question, appreciation, comments, please feel free to do so.
Hare Krishna. Wonderful class. Thank you very much. Very inspiring. How do we know if it's Krishna in front of us, as opposed to seeing someone who is trying to take advantage of our good heart?
Such a great question. Thank you so much. I can only offer from my own realization, but in those cases, what I've found is that the best course of action is to really ask those senior mentors, senior devotees who have walked a path, who are, in a season of life that is ahead of us. And so sometimes we can go to our peers and we can ask for advice, we can ask for guidance, but sometimes it's even more important to go to those who are ahead of us in their spiritual life. And in this case, at least in my own life, when I've done so, I've seen how, I would say 2 caveats with that. One is that they are ahead of us in our spiritual life, and 2, that they know you. They know your nature, they know your life. And because of that, they're able to offer perspective and guidance in a very personal way, not in a general way. Because in the question that you asked, it is a very, very fine line. It's hard. It can be very hard to know, is this Krishna that's offering this situation, or is this something else? And so to be able to navigate that requires a lot of subtlety, a lot of nuance, and someone who can really understand our own conditionings, the way in which we see things, and who can help us to process it. And that, along with prayer, would really be the 2, the dual combination, at least that I rely upon myself. But I'm sure that there are other ways as well. And if there's anybody else who would like to share, please feel free to do so.
In one sense, it's always Krishna. In one sense, it's always Krishna. It may seem this test is coming from this misdirected person who is acting in an inimical way, but somehow or other, Krishna's loving hand is behind that. And then how can we see? He asked a very good question. How do we see when we say, Lord, I'll do whatever you want? No attachment, no aversion. Then we can hear Krishna's voice. Like you said, we pray, Lord, what should I do? What do you want me to do? I want to please you in this circumstance. How do I respond to this? And you're ready. And I want this answer. I don't want that answer. We're really ready to go either way. And Krishna will hear Krishna's voice.
So beautiful. Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. So true. Ultimately, Krishna's hand is behind everything. It's just being able to discern the way that we should respond to however that's coming to us. And in that, guidance is always so helpful. And one of the things that is really powerful is when we're able to, when we receive help to understand how to process things, not just be given the solution, but to be able to process and to discern that, oh, like you said, Prabhu, perhaps I'm averse to something, or perhaps I'm attached to something, and to help, to have someone else help us see that perhaps we are suffering within a particular type of duality. That can be really, really powerful. Thank you. Kula Pradeep Prabhu, thank you. You had sent a question. So your discussion today was a refreshing reminder of humility juxtaposed to the challenges of the ego. Any suggestions to help maintain this mood from day to day? It's a great question. It's one that I need to do of more. So thank you. So what comes to mind is, again, personally for myself, I don't spend enough time actually engaging in activities that will help cultivate my own humility. That's what I notice in my life. Even the small little, meditation, if we can call it that, at the beginning of trying to just tap into our own insignificance. That's so important. And the prayers that we hear of Gajendra, for example, of Mahaprabhu within the Shikshastakam, this cultivation of saying daily prayers and allowing ourselves to not just say them in terms of just, oh, right, I'm supposed to say these prayers, let me try to get them done with as quickly as possible, so I've ticked it off my box, but to be able to really stay within that space and that mood of prayer. I think that's really what that space, that cultivation of that mood is what helps us when we are challenged by the ego in our day-to-day lives. And so I know my own spiritual master is very, very, very fond of saying numerous prayers. And I see this very much with any advanced devotee, that they really they find their favorite passages of prayers within the Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam is filled with prayers. And then to really be able to go deep within any one of those prayers that we feel particularly called towards, that can really, really be helpful. I hope that's of service.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Can I squeeze one in?
Yes, Mother Gail.
Yeah. I'm referring to Vidura's reaction to Duryodhana's rudeness, and I think we were saying that he did feel his heart was pinched, when he was spoken to so harshly. But I think you said that simultaneously he was not perturbed. So I'm just trying to see if I have the right understanding about what his not being perturbed means. So because his heart was pinched, he was hurt, I think, by those words. So when we say that he was not perturbed, does that just mean that although he was hurt, he did not allow his hurt feelings to control his response to the situation? So because normally when we think of being perturbed, we think of being disturbed, so that's why I'm wondering if his not being perturbed doesn't mean that he wasn't disturbed, but instead that he just didn't allow that, I guess, agitation in the mind or in the heart to dictate what his response to the situation was going to be.
Yes, that is my understanding. And along with that, part of the reason why it didn't affect his response is because he was really able to see everything as though it was almost a drama that was occurring, right? That it was the external energy of the Lord that was arranging for all of this. And later on in those verses, it actually says that Vidura recognized that as much as he didn't want ruination to take place, for his brother Dhritarashtra, and for the rest of the family, he could see by the Lord's arrangement that's what the Lord wanted, and that this was the only way in which Dharma would be established. And so that doesn't mean that we may not feel pain, and I think that's what really Vidura felt. He felt pain that why did it have to go about this way? If Dhritarashtra could only see the truth, and if he could only act on that truth, all of this, the devastation, the ruination that was forthcoming could be avoided. But one of the beautiful things that we see with Vidura is that he's able to actually see the Lord's plan, and with that accept it and realize, okay, my contribution, my service, whatever I was supposed to do, that has come to an end. It's time for me to move forward. And I'll do so by actually going on pilgrimage, hearing from the great saintly souls, which is what he does.
When we are in such a situation, let's say if we are in a very painful situation like that, and we have no idea, I am not of the Vidura's spiritual stature, and so I cannot see what Krishna's plan is here. So it's going to be difficult for me to see the whole thing as a drama. So practically speaking, am I supposed to think, okay, let's say this person just did me wrong, am I supposed to think, well, yes, it's my karma, but also he misbehaved, just because it was my karma to be the object of that behavior doesn't mean that he didn't misbehave. So the fact that he did misbehave, should I also see that, aside from seeing it as my karma, should I also see it as, well, that person, he was just identifying with his material mind, and therefore in that way it was the material nature at work more than it was that person at work. Is that how to see it as more of a drama at my level?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I'm just trying to figure this out.
Yeah, it's actually such an important question. Thank you for bringing that up, Gail. And from what you said, and tell me if I heard correctly, the way that you were processing it, if I were to say it in other words, it's essentially that you can judge the behavior or the sin, but not the person or the soul.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because they're identifying. They don't realize that they are identifying with something outside of them, their true selves. They don't realize.
Absolutely, yes. And in order to do that, I'll perhaps also add this other piece that that would be the ideal way to really process and to work through that situation. And alongside that, I would also perhaps offer that it would be important to have people in your own life where you can process that pain, disappointment, those hurt feelings, because that is also there. I know for myself, I'm nowhere in my advancement where I can only see and only live by that understanding of judge or I don't want to use the word hate or dislike the sin but not the sinner, or not the person who's acting under the influence of the false ego, under the influence of the material mind. But I also need places where I can genuinely process what's happened, and to reveal my heart, reveal my hurt, because if that doesn't take place, then at least for me, it becomes artificial. I'm not truly able to be able to let go.
Yeah. Well, definitely, hate the sin, not the sinner, is way above my pay grade for sure.
Very, very. Me too. But I think it's small steps, right? And I think that's really what Krishna is looking for. That, whenever these kinds of occurrences happen in our lives, if I'm able to just take one small step in even recognizing, wow, the false ego and material mind that this person is under the influence of is actually causing me pain and suffering. It's not the person, it's not the soul themselves. If even we can remind ourselves of that separation, that's already movement in the right direction. That's enough, and then to ask Krishna and to pray to Krishna, can you help me understand this deeper? Please help me understand this in a way where this, I can turn to you, that all of these become opportunities to turn to you, because that's really what they are. They're opportunities to turn to Krishna. But instead, I know for myself, rarely do I see it as an opportunity. I see it as an attack on my own, feelings or my own ego.
Yes, I agree that it's a small step in the right direction, because there was a time when it would have never occurred to me to think in the heat of the situation, this person is not their mind, that would have never even been on my radar, so the fact that it used to not be and now it is, that's at least something, right?
Exactly. And I think those recognizing that, having people in our lives who can remind us that we're making progress, maybe we're not at the stage of Vidura, that's a huge leap. It's also important to notice even the small minuscule steps that we're moving towards in that direction. That is so important. So important.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this wonderful class.
Thank you, Gail. Always it's such a pleasure to hear from you. And always you have the best questions.
You're so sweet. Thank you.